Hello, my name is Hans Thill. I'm a German poet of Heidelberg. I'm writing poetry, of course, as every poet does, and I translated some poems, and poetry from French and other languages, and I published several anthologies of the German tradition and of European poetry also. That's it.
Thanks, Hans. I'm Jo Langdon, and I write fiction, sometimes criticism and poetry. I have two poetry collections, a chapbook called Snowline and a full-length collection called Glass Life, which was published in 2018 by Five Islands Press. And recently I've been participating in this expedition poetry project and have had the great fortune to be working with Hans on each other's poems.
Okay, me too. Of course, I was in the same project, and I think translating poetry is impossible, but we have to do it. We have to do the impossible. And perhaps I could say that the translating poetry is a project and a sort of friendship machine. Our relationship is antipode. We are antipodes, but we had a nice time by translating and not knowing each other.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jo.
I love that impossible friendship machine. And I think, I'm not sure, Hans, you might have had more familiarity with the project and its what the process would be like and the structure. I think it was really unknown territory for me. Even I'm, not at all an experienced translator, but it's been such a gratifying project to exchange in this way and to have conversations about our poems, but also beyond, or perhaps in terms of the broader contexts in which we're writing, and to almost visit Heidelberg and Melbourne, I think, in this sort of, or France as it were at the moment, in these virtual spaces.
Okay. Perhaps we could read some poem. Who begins? Is it me or
I think it's you in German and then me.
Okay,
in
it's
English.
always me. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So it's one poem which is called Ohne Titel Trinkwasser. I have written a lot of poems without title, and they have a title afterwards. Ohne Titel Trinkwasser. Ich möchte nicht das Blatt sein, auf dem ein ruheloses Insekt Platz nimmt. Ich trage noch die Schuhe von gestern, als sie sprachen, im Teich schwammen, ungeduldig. Ich gehe ans Fenster, das noch offen steht, aus der Zeit, als hier ein Garten war. Es sind Luftlöcher im Karton, aber die Insekten kommen durch. Die Farben zerfließen zu Trinkwasser. Ich möchte nicht das Gras sein unter den Sohlen, wenn das Wasser seine Sache sagt, wenn der Hund in der Erde gräbt. That's it.
And this is my translation of Untitled or Drinking Water. Untitled, drinking water. I don't want to be the leaf on which a restless insect settles. I still wear yesterday's shoes as languages swim in the pond, impatient. I go to the window, still open from the time there was a garden. There are air holes in the cardboard, but insects come through. The colours melt into drinking water. I don't want to be grass under the soles. when the water says its thing as the dog digs up earth.
Thank you, Jo. Nice translation.
I hope so. I hope it's done justice to your poetry, to your poems, which for me at least seem to comprise these beautifully strange, and I think, poetry is inherently strange, so that's always meant as a compliment or like a quality I look for in poetry, but these kind of dreamlike spaces that are really familiar but also defamiliarized or estranged, have some kind of estrangement. Is there anything you wanted to share about drinking water, or do you prefer to let the poem kind of speak for itself, stand alone a little?
Yes, I think your translation is as laconic as the poem is, and I think the poem is not very complicated to understand, and we all have some drinking water problems around the world, and in Melbourne and in Heidelberg and in Tel Aviv and everywhere. So I think we just perhaps could talk about some translation problems you saw in this poem, but I'm not sure. What do you think? I don't remember really if there have been any problems.
I think that the problems were probably very much mine, in the sense of initially, so we started with this project with what were called the interlinear translations, which was quite a new term for me, but would you say like quite a literal line by line translation from German into English and then vice versa. And I felt, not having the capacity, not having the fluency in German language, I felt quite tentative at first, and like the interlinear translations read really well, and that I didn't want to really alter them too much. But then, of course, what was my role? I wasn't really participating in the process, and then I think after, with your encouragement, Hans, then maybe I took too many liberties and got too confident and had to kind of find that middle ground, but started to think about further possibilities for movement within the poems. So not just translating them line by line, but if maybe some of the line breaks or the syntax, like questions about what would make a most faithful translation, but then also thinking beyond problem, I guess, and into possibility. So the poem isn't just like a lesser version of the original once it's brought into another language, but it can take on another kind of life. And that was kind of exciting, however imperfect it might be, and whatever inexperience I was bringing in my translating skills. In terms of the particulars, the specifics in this poem, I remember, I think in the interlinear translation, or perhaps once I started putting the poems through different translation devices and things like that, there were some particular words and variations that I found quite interesting. So my translation has, "I don't want to be the leaf on which a restless insect settles," but there was a version that had sheet instead of leaf, and I think that's where I came into dialogue again with you, Hans, and kind of talking, because sheet has a different immediate meaning and might relate more to text and writing or an open book or something like that, whereas leaf was much more associated to the natural world. And I believe, of course, I went with your answer, Hans, but was there anything that kind of came up that you can remember with this poem and its detail?
we were just talking. Those interlinear versions are the danger of interlinear versions is you see a verse and you think, oh, that's all right. I don't have to change anything about this. That's one side. The other side is you're thinking, oh, I have to change everything to make my own translation, and both things are not don't lead to good translations, let's say. But the interlinear versions have really a danger that you think you understand, and you have to think. And we made it like this with your poems also. You have to think about every word you have which is in front of you. You have to translate. You have to think about every word. You don't. The great danger is to think, oh, this word is all right. There is no problem with it. So, and that's therefore our project is interesting, because we have the possibilities to talk about or to write about our poems. Sometimes you're just translating by interlinear versions, and you don't. The author is dead, or don't want to talk to you, or something like that. And so our project is really, that's why I say it's a friendship machine. But our project is interesting, that we can share some work, and we can so learn each other, and it's really a very nice experience. And but as an author being translated, I think you have to let the translation that the translation can be worked out freely. I think so. We talked about the length of the verses, and about the this stuff, and it just changed. I remember you changed it, or you wanted to change it, and you showed it to me. I said everything is all right. I think because the breadth of a poem differs in every language. Of course, a poem in English is not a poem in German. Can't be. So
of course, yeah, the syntax is quite different.
Yes.
And I think that was something I was very conscious of, was as soon as I started to maybe change the lineation in some of your poems, then they were structured differently, and they took on a different shape on the page, which was something I was conscious of, that might matter to you in particular. I know it would matter, probably matter to me, or matter to many poets, how the kind of the visual impact of the poem on the page. And so I guess treading that delicate kind of balance between being faithful and then having some kind of not creativity, I guess trying to understand what to its own terms, and then what translation actually means beyond going word for word and line for line.
Okay, thank you, Joe. We're just starting now with the English poem, Australian English poem.
So this is a poem called Tend. I could some days mistake for a flower the perineum by letter and sound. It's true, like some variant nasturtium of jaunty colour, atop salad leaves and dressed in bright oil, else a perennial among the dahlia, salvia, agapanthus, lobelia. The soft give, stretch of leaf, bend and wet, break of succulent, echeveria, aloe, jade. In the clinic, she said, I'd like to make another stitch. Is that okay? Then let's hope it works. Let's hope. Though it's true that petals in disrepair don't really resemble anything else. My daughter tears their heads open, her fat baby fists unforgiving, each garden rife for ruinous joy, The pleasures of unmaking, a body like a bed, like a plan, like a seam pulled loose, a piece of cake. It worked in the way that things work out, like a platitude. Love fell over us anyway, unforgiving in stark summer light. Here, where pictures pin us to tired bodies against pink walls, those sure and perfect buds of climbing rose, of fuchsia beyond us. It's true, I don't have the language I once did. Thank you.
It's a very nice poem. It's also a leaf poem, like my drinking water, and that's also a leaf poem, but it's also a birth poem. And I read it in German, and that's to say it's just a sort of translation to read a poem. I have, for example, I have another kind of reading your poem as you. I couldn't imitate you by reading how you are reading the poem, of course. And
yeah,
so that's also so the translations begin by reading the poem. Neige. Es konnte vorkommen, dass ich das Perineum für eine Blume hielt, buchstäblich und klanglich stimmt. So als Variante der Kapuzinerkresse, flottes, bunt auf Blattsalat und angemacht mit hellem Öl, sonst mehrjährig unter Dahlien, Salbei, Agapanthus, Lobelien. Ein sanftes Nachgeben, Blattstrecke, Biegung und nasse Bruchstelle bei Sukkulenten, Fettblattrosette, also Aloe, Jade. Die in der Klinik sagte, ich würde noch einen Stich machen, in Ordnung, und hoffen wir, dass es klappt, hoffen wir es. Aber es stimmt auch, dass welkende Blumenblätter wirklich nicht aussehen wie etwas anderes. Meine Tochter zerreißt ihnen die Köpfe, ihre dicken Babyfäuste gnadenlos, jeder Garten ein Hort der Zerstörungsfreude, Lust am Auseinandernehmen. Ein Körper wie ein Bett, wie ein Plan, wie eine Naht, ausgerissen ein Stück Brot. Es klappte, wie die Dinge sich fügen, wie eine Plattitüde. Die Liebe überfiel uns jedenfalls. Gnadenlos im krassen Sommerlicht hier, wo Bilder uns anklammern. An müde Körper gegen rosa Mauern, jene sicheren und vollkommenen Knospen der Kletter, Rose der Fuchsie jenseits von uns, stimmt. Ich habe nicht mehr die Sprache, früher schon. So that's it. It's a very laconic poem. I think it's one of, the other one are also very laconic, but this one is interesting because it's something about plants and something about a birth and something about a baby destroying the plants, and so it's a dramatic poem. There's a lot of drama in it. The drama of a birth, the drama of plants, of seeing plants and so on. So what was a little problem for me, a little big problem, was the title of the poem, tend, which is a verb, of course, adhortative in Latin to say, and I tried out several possibilities, but then I took Neige, which is nearly the word in German of tend, Neige. So that was a problem. Another problem was just the piece of cake, which we don't have. We don't have a piece of cake as something simple and visible. You know it when you see it, and so on. So I took ein Stück Brot just to have something to eat and to have something simple to eat. But I'm not sure that I would. Perhaps I will change the piece of cake as a Stück Brot, perhaps in 4 weeks or so, when I'm revisiting the poem. I liked it very much. I liked your poems very much because they are very different from mine. So that's already something which makes me very happy to have things which are not mine, but which are from another person. And visibly, we are other persons, of course, yes, and antipodes and everything. That's really nice to have relationships with people who differ from myself and so on.
It feels like, you know, such a gift and an honor to have that close attention on my poems and the particular details here, and I appreciate the challenges. I think in a lot of my poems, I've been interested in kind of doublings or words that have various associations, whether they're both a noun and a verb, or maybe different, so some sort of suggestive ambiguities here. And yeah, it's really interesting, I think, when we have idioms or expressions. Or I know another poet I worked with had one of those kind of famous, perhaps not a famous version, but a German word for which there's no direct translation into English in the title. And so those challenges, I think, or opportunities, the possibilities for creating that double for the poem. I love that you call this poem dramatic. I know it was one of the first poems I wrote after my daughter was born, and I sort of thought I was just writing it playfully and not ever for an audience, that it was just a bit of a silly exercise in getting back into language, but then it did go out into the world, and I'm kind of glad it has, in terms of where during my pregnancy, I remember a couple of friends would say, I can't wait to read the poems you'll write about babies. And I would kind of recoil and hate that idea of being typecast as, you know, that I'd write the motherhood poems or the, and then inevitably I went on to fulfill that cliche. And I think, you know, wanted to write into other, the cliches of the plant poem or the flower poem, but maybe not in an overly earnest way, hopefully. Hans, could you say more about what you mean about being anti-poets?
Yes, not antipodes, because you're on the other side of the globe.
Of course.
In Germany, we say Antipoden. You don't have this word in English. So if we,
I think I must have misheard you. I'm just displaying my ignorance completely. But I see. I was thinking it was.
No, it was just silly to take a word from German to English and to think you could understand it. It's the Latin word antipodi. That means we were our feet are on the other side of the.
Of course, yeah, and then in the antipodes. Of course. And of course, there's been for us, I think, as well, the translation through Zoom in these encounters as well, and email, which might be different. I know previously this project is run in Heidelberg in person. I think Andrea talks often about, quite tantalizingly, about the wine and the cake and the ambience in Heidelberg. So it's been another kind of venture, I think, making the project virtual or digital, and then emails. But we've been able to exchange some terrific kind of e-postcards and pictures and anecdotes and things like that. So again, there are possibilities in that space.
Yes, perhaps someday we could meet.
I hope so. I hope so. That would be really nice.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Hans.